Okay, we'll get started. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the June Infrastructure and Environmental Services Committee. My name's Ethan White. I'm the chair of the committee. I'd like to welcome elected members, staff, guests and presenters to the meeting tonight. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting on the land of the traditional country of the Kaurna people and that we respect their spiritual relationship with their country. We also acknowledge the Kaurna people as the custodians of the Greater Adelaide region and that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still as important to the living Kaurna people today. Attendance record, members present here, we have an apology from Councillor Hughes and Councillor Kosh will be arriving about 15 minutes late. Everyone else is here. Members, are there any motions to grant leave of absence? There be none, there's no current leave of absence and there's no non-attendance. Public open forum. Does any members of the community wish to address the committee tonight? No, that's all good. Thank you. Item 4, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest, members? There be none. Item 5, confirmation of minutes from the IES committee meeting on the 9th of April 2024. I'm looking for a mover to move that. Councillor Solomon, thank you. And a seconder, Councillor Lorna. Is there any discussion on the minutes? There be none. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Carried unanimously. Thank you. Okay, item 6, business arising from the minutes. I'll take it as read, but if there are any questions, members, on any of the items, we can take them now.
Can I do
Yep.
declaration of interest on 8.2?
Oh, yeah, no, do you mind just putting your mic on, Mayor, and just, we've just got a declaration of interest from the Mayor?
Yeah, 8.2, I'll declare a general conflict and I'll stay in the room.
Oh, yes, no worries. We can deal with that when we get there, thank you. We'll go back to business arising. Is there any questions, members, on any of the business? Yes. Wendy, would you be happy to provide just a brief update on the first item on Steep Creek Lines management? Thank you. Oh, are you? Oh no. That's no good. We're disconnected. Would you be comfortable just running up to the lectern potentially? Wendy, sorry, yeah, I'm not sure why we're disconnected that side. There is an empty seat, a couple empty seats too, if you want to join in. Thanks, Wendy.
This one works.
Cool.
All right, hello. So through you, Chair. So this is a very long, outstanding action out of the business arising. It's actually from 2014 and that's way before my time at council. However, I believe it came up as part of the Springwood development and the concerns there around steep creek line management. The reality is that's a development that is well underway and we have got much of it in steep creek environments. We've done an addendum to the standard development guidelines which really does cover off the intent of managing these steep creek lines. Look, we follow the best practice. We push the developers to make sure that these creek lines are being managed and we look at the boundaries of blocks to ensure that we're not encroaching on them. There's a whole suite of federal and state requirements on the Springwood development and they also interface with this management. My view is that we probably don't need a specific steep creeks management plan or policy and that really this fits in within our broader guidelines. But for now, we are managing it in real time and I believe we're actually managing it very well.
Thanks, Wendy, for that update. Much appreciated. Members, is there any other question from the business arising? No. We will turn to our decision reports. Yes, we'll turn to our decision reports then. Item 7.1, Local Design Review Scheme. We've got Brad McCormack here from the Office of Design and Architecture SA. Brad is going to give us a presentation and then we'll take some questions. So, Councillor Kosh, hello. We'll just note that Councillor Kosh arrived at 7:05. Megan, thank you. Okay, Brad, whenever you're ready, you can turn the mic on and the floor is yours.
I'll have a clicker. Is it on? Yeah. All right. Yes, all right, thank you. So my name is Brad McCormack. I'm the Senior Planning and Design Officer from the Office for Design and Architecture. About 3 or 4 years ago, I started working on the Local Design Review Scheme, preparing it, working with councils, other state government agencies as part of the planning reform. It's an opt-in scheme for councils to participate in, and we're currently looking to work with councils as part of a pilot program, and I'm here just to share some of that with you today, and then I'm happy to take any questions at the end as well. So I'd just like to acknowledge that we're meeting on beautiful Gunner country tonight and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'm just going to run through, I understand the report that you've all received it covers design quality and a little bit of context, but I thought I'll just run through a little bit at the start of this presentation just in a couple of minutes, and then we can get into what the pilot scheme might contain and some examples of where design reviews had effect. I do quite like starting this presentation with this statement. So every new development has the potential to improve our quality of life, attract investment and reduce our impact on the environment. It's just something I like to keep in mind. Just it helps me think of things in their next larger context. So, and quite often as planners we become driven by good process, but it's helpful to also think about the outcome that we're creating, because the outcome is what communities are left with in terms of development. So when we talk about design quality, we mean more than how something looks. The principles of good design were developed sort of in the early days of ODASA, and they help us consider and discuss design quality in an objective manner. So it's more than whether or not we like something or how it looks. It's an important consideration, but the reactions are often subjective. So when we talk about design quality, we use these principles to frame this discussion. So whether or not how well something responds to its context, both existing context and desired future context, whether or not it's inclusive for all abilities, ages, cultures, genders, how durable something is, whether or not it contributes value to its surrounds, how well it performs, and how sustainable it is. And these principles underpin all of the work we do at ODASA, including the Local Design Review Scheme. So why does design quality matter? Well, there's a lot of academic and scientific research that talks about the benefits of good design and also the lasting and long-term impacts of bad design that can have on our lives. So as the links between design outcomes, human behaviour, health and well-being, and livability are better understood, we as custodians of the built environment have a responsibility to use this evidence to make informed decisions about the built environment. And so the list on the slides are just some examples from the research, which there's references within, I think, attachment 1 of your report, if you want to look at that further. So public health and well-being, social interaction, I won't go through them all, increased productivity, reduced operating and maintenance costs, adaptive reuse, For those who may not be familiar with the design review process itself, it's an independent peer review process where a panel of built environment experts, such as architects, landscape architects or urban designers, review the design quality of a proposal and identify opportunities for improvement. Importantly, the panel's not there to redesign the proposal itself. They're there to identify opportunities and work with the proponent to find opportunities to improve design quality. It operates pre-lodgement. It's voluntary, and the advice carries weight in decision-making, and that's in the PDI Act. The image on the right is just illustrating the impact on design quality is greatest earlier in the outset in the process, and this diminishes over time as the detail gets refined of a design proposal, where the cost of changes to the design then increase. So it's better to get the proponent in earlier while they're still developing the design. State Design Review was established in 2011. South Australia was the first state to have this. It Kirstine, who's our government architect, actually came out from the UK and established the process here in South Australia. And it's still operating today, and we see about 70%, or actually over 70% of eligible projects come through the process voluntarily. And the local design review scheme was established on the principles of the state program, but we wanted to make it flexible so councils could establish it to suit their own context, the development typologies they're expecting to see. So we see the local design review pilot program as an exceptional opportunity for us to collaborate closely with councils. We want to help councils support high quality design for their buildings, but also their own public realm and civic building upgrades, and master plan communities as well. It's an opportunity to demonstrate leadership in planning and design process and be one of the first councils to adopt this. Improve the quality of development applications received by council staff. Create opportunities for staff development and collaboration. I want to work with your team as well. This is absolutely two-way sharing of information. And to that end as well, demonstrating the potential of the scheme and identifying improvements for future users. So we're absolutely open to working with councils initially and helping improve the scheme itself. So as part of the pilot program, Adasa, myself and the team are really keen to work quite closely with early adopting councils from the outset to make sure it's established well. So undertaking some early processes, the registration fee would be waived, so we'd help with the registration process. Refining the eligible classes of development, which I'm seeing in the report that Chris has, and the team have had a go at, which is excellent, and I'm happy to work with the team to help refine that if need be. Help with identifying the design panel members and their contracts. So we have about 40 panel members from the State Design Review Panel, and we're open to letting council use those for the pilot program to save setting up contracts or recruiting existing panel members. So we'd be happy to work with you to work that process out. One of who's in the room tonight, Michael McEwen's here as well. So he's one of our state panel members. Support with early design review sessions. We're open to advising or allocating one of our design advisors from the State Design Review team to come and work with council through some of the early design review sessions, and transferring that knowledge over to council staff. So as they become more familiar and confident with the process, we could then step back a little bit but maintain an ongoing and advisory role. We've also developed a best practice guide. The chapters are on the screen right now, and I think you received chapter 1, which is designed to be a standalone document about the process. The other chapters, I do have a copy here of the full guide. I'd be happy to share that with anyone afterwards, which includes all of the templates and all of the administrative requirements under the scheme. It's all included in the guide to make the process easier. All the forms, templates, and details to be real. So following council's decision tonight, if you'd like to proceed, there are some other information. So resourcing, who's doing what under the pilot, the eligible classes of development, as I mentioned, the number of design review sessions and the time frame, and the cost. So these are our State Design Review Panel members, so we'd be happy to work with you to find out who would be best suited. So when I was invited to come along tonight, Chris suggested that I provide some examples of where design reviews had a positive impact. We don't often get to talk about this in this context, so this is quite interesting. I will admit I'm not an architect, I'm a planner and urban designer, so I've enlisted the help of the State Design Review team to help identify what the improvements were. So I'm going to have to read these from the slides, so bear with me. But the common threads, regardless of the location, scale and building typology, public realm contribution and streetscape activation, response to context, including local and state heritage places, high quality materiality, sustainability ambitions, and amenity for occupants and neighbours. So this is a 16-storey mixed-use residential building. It participated in 4 state design review sessions. So in addition to those points I just mentioned, key areas of design development for this particular building: refinement of the overall massing and composition, a more contextual response to the adjacent estate heritage building, including authentic high-quality material selections, and an improved residential amenity, including shared communal spaces and internal floor plan layout. Example to number 2. Oh, yep. Yep. All right, example number 2. This is a 7-storey mixed-use residential building. It participated in 2 state design review sessions. And the key areas of design development include a more contextual approach for architectural expression and materiality for the coastal environment, a reduction in building height, the introduction of below-ground car parking, an improved sense of address, and the integration of the neighbouring local heritage place, which is just on the right. So in the first design review session, the scheme that was presented didn't include that, and it was incorporated when it came back in response to the advice from the design review panel. This one here, 2 schemes that engaged in the pre-lodgement design review process. Scheme number 1 went through 5 design review sessions to get from the very left image to the one in the middle. Key areas of design development that you'll see here are the simplified building massing and composition, provision of a break between the building elements, improved podium expression, integration of the state heritage building, activated public realm at the ground level, and this scheme was ultimately approved in 2016 but did not proceed. And then scheme 2, which is on the right, engaged in three design review sessions and was approved by the SCAP. And the key areas of design development for this one were podium scale and expression responding to the state heritage building and prominent city corner, provision of an activated public realm that engages with the state heritage building, and detailing of the facade system responding to the environmental conditions. So that's it for me for the presentation. I hope that was a helpful introduction. I'm happy to take any questions now. Yes?
Thanks, Brad. Yeah, Mayor Ribbon, question?
Yeah, I want you to come back to Gawler. Heritage place subject to a major development proposal above 1 million in value. What would be the design advice for either a state or local heritage place in this context? And we have overlays of character areas, historic areas, and we have a state heritage area called Churchill. So just bear that in mind. Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thanks, Mayor. I have a question, Brad. So the examples I think you gave were really good at showing that progression, and obviously the scale and type of architecture is very, very different to what we'd be expecting in the town of Gawler. So we don't want to scare anyone in that sense. But have you got any examples of so what we've got before us tonight is the local design review scheme. Have you got any examples of that type of platform around South Australia or around the country where there's more of a local scheme, which is what we're looking at implementing, as opposed to the statewide scheme? Is there any examples you could give us?
Yep, so you would likely have a local a heritage advisor at council. So this would operate in a similar way where it's pre-lodgement, it's design advice up front at that scale. There are examples interstate. I think the city across Greater Perth, there's about 17 local design review panels operating in Greater Perth that would be providing design advice on matters of this scale that you may be expecting here. I don't have any with me to show you. I'd be happy to maybe speak with one of the Victorian panels or even a Perth panel to get some if you'd like, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that'd be, if you could sort of maybe provide that to us afterwards, just some additional examples. I think that would help members. Sorry, Mayor. Your question before, apologies. Do you want to just, please feel free to ask again, apologies.
Sorry.
If you could just put your mic on.
Page 17, heritage place subject to a major development proposal above 1 million in value, either state or local. As I said, we have a state heritage area called Churchill, and we also have overlays of town character. So how would you proceed with that? Heritage, these two buildings are state heritage buildings. We did a major redevelopment here, and we've won a national award for these buildings. So how would you proceed? How would you?
I mean, it's important to, so heritage is a specific matter.
Yeah.
So we, in the state system, the Department of Heritage is a separate technical entity.
Heritage SA.
Yeah, and the design review panel is a separate entity. So
Yeah.
we would still want to see council keep their heritage advisor, and they could work quite closely with the panel in briefing the panel on heritage matters.
Yeah.
That's how it works at the state level as well. So it's absolutely connected. I mean, it's not even just limited to heritage, but there might be other technical reports or technical evaluations that feed into the design review panel session. So as part of the briefing or pre-briefing of the panel before a session, all of those matters, the planning overlays, if it is heritage, if there are specific heritage matters, we quite often recommend the panel walk the site or do a site visit to understand if there's local specific contextual issues or challenges or opportunities. So does that help answer the question? So we'd be wanting to...
no. I guess the design review panel has to be in place. So heritage matters, yeah, we would work with Heritage SA. Absolutely, absolutely, you have to.
Yes.
You would need to have a site visit, I think.
Yep.
And you would need to understand the neighbours and the context on which you would redesign a heritage place, and that would envisage greater application to the neighbours. You would need to understand the heritage nature of the state, either a state or local, and you would need to understand the nature of what you want to do. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, the way that the scheme is set up is that a council planner would be involved through the process as well. So they would take the place as ODAS's design advisor, if you will. So they understand the planning policy. They help brief the panel as well before the session. So they understand the planning environment and the context as well, including the heritage overlays.
Yeah.
And context is one of the principles of good design. So I'm happy to show you the template of design advice, but it's broken down by context, like those principles.
I haven't seen any of that.
Yeah. So that is part of the template, talking about context. So the panel will follow that format as they work through. So it's a structured template. The way ODASA provides referral advice is in a letter. It's quite technical. So we've tried to simplify that and provide a standard template, which is what they use in Western Australia, to make it easier for the proponent teams to understand.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Thanks, Mayor. I'll just go to Councillor Shanks first. He had his hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Brad, for the presentation. I'm always interested to hear how we can tap into our local knowledge, whether that be state level, local knowledge, and something that I rely on in our industry quite heavily. Sometimes I do see a bit of a gap in between the computer says no on a planning level, but rather a performance-based solution on, what can be done rather than what can't be done. So I'm sort of seeing, I'm hearing this panel is that sort of, bridging piece in how do we get this across the line in the more complex developments, not the ones that are the tick and flick, in lack of a better term. My question, we're a little bit unique here in the town of Gawler, and the Mayor rightfully touched on our heritage essence. I think we're one of two areas in the state that actually require a full DA for even changing the paint on a main street commercial building. So there are processes that are involved. There is a very heavy heritage significance here in the town of Gawler that is only seconded by, in Adelaide, CBD there. So I guess my question is, how many other councils out of the 68 we have here in the state are opting to go into this scheme? What are you seeing in the industry, uptake-wise? You're selling a product that is not just for this council, obviously. So I'm just trying to get my head around appetite-wise, why now? I note the PDI Act changing more recently. I mean, I say more recently, but it is more recently in local government speak. So just a bit of context around that.
Sure. So I think in the context of the broader planning reform, there were certain things that had to happen. So the PDI Act had to come in, the state planning policies, the whole new planning system, the development framework going to a more performance-based system. So the design review scheme is always, the way it's written in the Act is that it is voluntary for councils to establish. So I think in that context, the reason why there may have been no take-up as yet is partly to do with that. We are in talks with 4 councils at the moment, including Gawler, some more advanced than others. And so we're at a point now where we're quite excited and we're quite confident, I guess, that we'll be working with councils to establish this. And as I mentioned in the presentation as well, we're really keen to use this as a pilot two-way. Like, we want to understand if there are flaws, if it's overly complicated, so we can refine it together and make it better for future users, including other councils.
Follow-up? Yes.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. So just in regards to that, I saw a quick snippet of the professionals you put up. I didn't have too much of a quick look to be able to probably recognise some of the names in it. But just out of interest, the balance, because if you're talking to 4 councils, obviously you're hopeful or optimistic that you can grow that client base and work in partnership with a lot more councils throughout the state. But how are you going to manage the complexities that are isolated through different councils? So I sort of touched on our heritage essence that yes, we potentially parallel a little bit with Adelaide City Council, but that doesn't mean that we're exactly the same. And then also you start talking about Adelaide Plains councils, you start getting more rural. There's a whole different suite of planning complexities that will need to be worked through. So I guess how confident are you in your team, in the advisors and the like? Like how do you like your professionals knowing how the country works and how the country professionals know how the city works, in lack of a better term?
Sure. Design review doesn't just operate in the city, it does operate in the metro councils as well. We've had a number of proposals where councils that are not eligible to participate in design review because the design overlay is not present come to us and request sessions. So we have worked with the rural city of Murray Bridge before as an example, city of Salisbury, Mount Barker, I believe. So we have worked with other councils that are not in that capital city or in a city environment. The panel itself, there are 40 members, so I think they are all held in high regard. They've gone through a recruitment process. We've trained them. Their skills vary across architecture, landscape architecture and urban design. However, as part of this pilot, we'd be open if there is an architect you really want or an urban designer that you would want on the panel, we're open to then approaching them and seeing if they would like to be a part of it too. So it's very much a two-way street in terms of we want to get this set up for you and so it works well. Does that answer the question? And also, yeah, I mentioned before as well the local planning staff involvement as well. So before each design review session, there is a pre-briefing where the planners from PLUS, the planning department, come to ODASA and they brief our panel on planning issues. So it does get quite contextual and specific for each project, and we select the panel for each project based on their skills as well.
I'll go to Councillor Hennessy, then Councillor Kosh. Oh, we'll just stick with questions for now. Question? Yeah, no worries. Councillor Kosh.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm just wondering, you've obviously spoken to the industry, so what's their view? Do they think it's a good idea? Do they think it's worthwhile, etc.? Do they want to invest in it? Do they think it's going to cost them more money or what?
I mean, as I mentioned, we've got 70% of eligible projects participating voluntarily in the state program. I think it comes with a bit of a culture change as well. So demonstrating it via a pilot program is a great way to show developers locally that this is available. Particularly, I think your point as well about, performance-based planning or the more complicated planning applications is what this would typically be available for. So if there's an opportunity to provide the developer with progressive certainty, which is where it reduces their risk of refusal because they work through some of the design issues up front with the panel who understand the planning environment, it actually helps them secure more a streamlined approvals process, if you like.
Another question? Yeah.
I actually didn't read that in your report, the report here, but it does provide some small certainty for the developer.
Correct. So
okay.
in the Act says that the advice must be considered by the relevant authority during development assessment. So that is then, for the developer side, sort of rounding out the process that the CAP will actually see the same advice that they've received and had the opportunity to respond to.
Councillor Lorne?
Thank you there. My question is in regards to the actual costing and how that's put forward to the council, as if it's a pay-as-you-go situation.
Yes. Yep. So we charge our panel members. The panel members charge us. I can take it on notice if you like. I can't remember the exact amount. It's not in the presentation. It might be in the report.
$3.25 per person per
Correct.
meeting. Yep. And so, can I just follow on question?
Yeah, of course.
How many, if we're meeting twice a year, how many proposals are you expecting to get through for these $5,000? So I'm looking at if we're doing one of them, and we're spending $5,000 for somebody else to do a proposal to put back to council.
So what was it? I couldn't hear you properly, sorry.
Sorry. My question more is, if we have two sittings, how many are we expected to go through? How many proposals are we meant to look at? Because the way I look at it here, if we have one proposal and they meet twice, we spend $5,000 to have a proposal put forward. We're paying for that.
So yes, initially there is an opportunity for council to on-charge the cost to a developer. That would be a disincentive for them to participate, I think. We don't charge for the state program, it's free. The Act makes it possible for that to happen if council wants to do that. So what we'd do, I think, with the cost is that we would pay our panel members for their time based on those costs that are in the report. So it's $3.25, I think you said. And then we could then invoice council for that. But we'd need to work that out, I guess, in the next step if you wish to proceed.
Thanks, Councillor Lorne. I'll just go to Andrew. Would you like to make any comments, Andrew?
It's probably a question or a bit of context for Councillor Lorne, but my understanding of how Chris wrote the report was that we effectively felt that probably in the last 12 months you might have had one DA that would have triggered the need for a panel such as this, and that we factored in potentially sitting 3 times. But it could be 3 DAs that get one sitting each. It's a bit of a guess as to how many meetings you'd need to have and how many applications would go through, because one year you might get no applications, next year you might get 5. But we came up with the number we felt was probably close to the mark. So that was, I guess, that point. The other thing I was just going to ask was a question perhaps to yourself. Later in the agenda we have a report on the state government's response to the review of the Planning Act. And in fact it talked about the design panel and encouraging a design panel approach being adopted in South Australia. Do you have any comments on that?
So I know the recommendation well. So I think the state government's response talks about, given the success of the state review design review program, they're surprised that local governments haven't taken it up. I think in the context of a whole complete system reform with new legislation, a completely new development assessment system, I can understand why it hasn't been taken up yet, but yeah, we're ready to go, and we hope that we can work together on this.
Thanks, Brad. Is there any more questions for Brad, specifically, members? No. Thanks, Brad, for presenting and answering all our questions. Much appreciated. And thank you for coming out on a Tuesday night.
That's fine.
I'll go to Councillor Hennessy if you're still happy to move. Councillor Hennessy?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, I am. And thank you, Brad. Unfortunately, the images you used have startled the horses. We are very fiercely protective of our heritage in this town. The community does care. So putting, whatever that was, 19 stories on main streets startles us. But given that, I think I'm prepared to support the idea of trying this as a pilot project. I think it would be good for us to indicate that we do need to have professionals that are used to working in a heritage area. So they do need, as the Mayor and Councillor Shanks have said, do need some understanding of our particular circumstances rather than perhaps a city-centric view of design. But on that basis, I'm happy to support it and look forward to giving it a go and seeing at the end of the 12 months what benefits it's brought to council, what benefits it's brought to the developers interested in doing work in Gawler, and what benefits our community sees from it. So I'm happy to move the motion.
Thanks, Councillor Hennessy. Mayor Redman?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I'm happy to second the motion. I put this up in 2021, and there were two motions in 221, June 221 and September 221, and yeah, this is a very, very good idea. And I think it will be a good pilot project. It will cost $5,000. I think we need good design in Gawler. We haven't had that yet, and I think it would be a really good idea to promote. Where are you? Oh, there you are, Brad. Brad, I think we need good design in Gawler, and I think this would be a great way forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor. Discussion, members. Councillor Solomon.
I'll just quickly add, and thank you, Brad, for the presentation. I think this is good because we're doing a lot of work at the moment here around that macro level strategy that we're seeing. Obviously, we're a growth area, and that's coming. So we want to make sure that on a more detailed and more, I'll call it micro level, that we're making sure that we're doing that design right. As you know, Brad pointed out there's a lot linked to good design, whether that's about community safety or well-being. What we value most here in our town, which is the close community that we do have here, which you don't get in a lot of other outer metropolitan places. So I think that's a really important thing, and this is a good pilot project, a good thing to do, because that growth is coming, and we only get one chance to make sure that we get that right. And so in favour of this one.
Thanks, Councillor Solomon. Councillor Shanks?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, look, I'm happy to support the pilot program. I think it is a small investment in I think, missing I guess a bridge between developer and council, if I'm being honest, because sitting on both sides. You know, we often come across what can't be done, but not looking at what can be done. And I don't mean any offence to any planners in the room. I know there are a couple here, but you've been trained to look at certain acts a certain way, and sometimes that hinders the ability to actually advance in some cases. And especially when we start getting into the unique designs. Now, depending on the architectural team and the consultants that you have behind you as a developer, realistically, 9 times out of 10, you merely stand in the way and development will end up happening to you because developers know what boxes to tick, what levers to pull to get that design through. So being able to have a panel that we can rely on of independents that have that understanding and real-time understanding as well. There's a whole bunch of things that are going on just in energy efficiency alone that sometimes don't quite catch up on the planning level. The best developments, I think, that go ahead are the ones that are looked at and planned appropriately before big dollars are spent in the technical drawings of how you're going to build it. More the why you're going to build it is looked at. And leaning on the industry professionals in real time, I think, has some value there. Look, I'm probably a little bit sceptical, to be honest, like probably Councillor Lorna is as well. You know, we're paying more consultants, and again, no offence to the consultants in the room, I know there's a lot here tonight as well. But, you know, just that extra layer of bureaucracy is what we can be seen to be investing in. So the onus is going to be on the pilot program to show that ROI. Because those outcomes, I think, are what we can all agree we all want. And each developer that looks at their parcel of land, their achievement and how they can make the most out of their dollar and you know, really develop and achieve what they're going for is blinkers on by default on making the most out of their land. Giving that weight to us and giving that tool in our toolbox to show, hey, how can you make the most out of your land while also tying into our visions, our statements. So, yeah, optimistic, but it will take that 12-month trial and hopefully you get that key project because that's also going to play a big part in that too.
Thank you. Councillor Kosh.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Look, I'm happy to support this. I suppose I've got a bit of a background in design when it comes to landscape design. And what I find is when I'm working with clients, looking at form and function, if you can spend a fair bit of time actually working out what the client needs and the best way to achieve that outcome with that parcel of land, overall you actually save money because you actually get an outcome that's, you know, the outcome, it could be multiple outcomes in a fairly small area. So you're actually, in many cases, you're saving money. So I'm hoping that the developers see that and come on board because good design leads to really good outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there any other discussion? Just a couple of things from me. I think this is quite an exciting prospect. I think, Brad, we were talking about some examples. It's good to see there's some examples interstate, but I also get the impression that this is quite unique for South Australia. So we've got an opportunity to be a leader in this space. And also later in the recommendation where it talks about considering the establishment of the regional design scheme and maybe reaching out to our neighbours and seeing what we can look at on a regional scale. I think that, again, that's a really great opportunity for the town of Gawler to be leaders in this space. And we do have such a unique township and a unique community in regards to our built structure and our built heritage in particular. So I think we are sort of, this is a perfect test run pilot program for us to trial. In regards to the $5,000, Andrew just informed me that the $5,000 to fund this will be used from savings from cutting the fringe budget, which we did earlier through the budget cycle. So I'll just, did you want to talk about that a little bit more, Andrew? Because just with the mic on.
Yeah, sorry. Basically, just to cut to the chase on it, the savings that were made on the festival were in the order of $13,000. We committed, if you recall, $8,000 to the Dad's group project, and my maths, 8 and 5 equals 13, so we're pretty close to the mark, I think, without changing the budget fundamentally at all. The only other thing I was going to say was also on point 4 that maybe it would be better if the wording finished at the word budget full stop, because ultimately if council chose to have more than 3 sessions in a given year, council would have to find those efficiencies internally through staff. It wouldn't be a budget additional impost on council, but I don't want the impression to be given that if there was a need for 4 meetings in a year, that we could only have 3, for example. I don't want to take it out of context, the 3 sessions. So it might read better if it just says budget full stop and got rid of the brackets. But that's your call.
I'll just go to the mover. Are you, and the seconder, so would you be happy with that? Yep, thank you, Mayor. Okay, thanks, Andrew, for that update. Is there any other discussion, members? Yeah, Councillor Lorna, yeah, of course.
Thank you for that. Look, as Councillor Shanks said there, I am pretty sceptical about this, putting another layer. I can understand why and what we're trying to do. The costing is a concern to me. So, you know, as we're saying, we've already spending more money out of a savings we've already done for, a pilot program, yeah, I sort of see how it goes, if there's benefit and uptake, and it could be worthwhile, but I'm not 100% sure on it, truthfully, at this point in time. So, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Councillor Lorna. Is there any other discussion, members? Councillor Hennessy, would you like to close the debate? Happy to put the motion? Okay, I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please raise your hand. All those against? It's carried. Thank you, members. Thank you, Brad, for your presentation. Thanks, Chris, and your team for the report. Okay, members, we'll move on to 7.2. Gawler Growth Framework Update. We've got Michael and Patrick here from Jensen Plus, and they're going to give us a bit of an update on the Gawler Growth Framework and the Gawler Integrated Transport Strategy, which we've condensed to Gawler Growth Framework. So, Michael and Patrick, your floor is yours. Just, yeah, pop your mic on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, councillors. Nice to see you again. This is very much an update presentation. It's a work in progress stage that we're at here. But since the last time we met with you, which was actually at your April meeting, we've been continuing to do some work, particularly around our co-design workshops, and we wanted to inform you and update you on what has happened. So in this presentation, I'll just give you a bit of an update on the programme. I'll maybe remind you of some of the outcomes that you shared with us in April at our workshop meeting, and then the 2 co-design workshops. I'll tell you what happened and what the outcomes have been, and then where we're going next. So that's the contents of the presentation. So process-wise, we are quite well advanced in the preparation of the Gawler Growth Framework, both planning and transport. We're getting to the business end, if you like. We are actually working on draft documents. We're here in June in yellow, and we've been working since December, as you can see there, and we've been to speak with you 2 or 3 times since then. I'll recap this at the end of the presentation, but we're looking to get our draft documents together, come back to you again for your feedback and endorsement before another round of stakeholder and community consultation programmed for end of July into August. But we're going okay on our programme. So when we met with you on the 9th of April, we gave you an update on the technical investigations, but we had a bit of a workshop, you might remember, and we had the whiteboard out, and we had our butcher's paper, and we talked about a few things. We got your input and feedback on some of the visioning and guiding principles, and you told us a few themes that you thought had to be included in the growth planning. We talked a bit about connectivity, and not only transport connectivity. We talked about open space connectivity. We talked about community connections. We talked about the country feel of the town and suburbs and rural context of the town of Gawler. We talked about the need for flexibility in our plans, and we talked about maybe some of those missing ingredients about how do we do a plan that stimulates investment and activation in different ways. You also told us a little bit about some of the possible scenarios that you thought would be good to test, and so the words there in the kind of 3rd column are suggesting some ideas for scenarios, and I hope that you can see that we have incorporated them into the work through the workshops. We talked about a living and working locally scenario. So what would it mean if we had, You know, we sustained or increased the number of jobs in relation to the number of people in the town. We talked about walkability. Could we make the most walkable town in the state? We talked about the need for mixed housing, mixed use through our scenarios, and we also talked about the idea of planning for the long term, or the so-called ultimate scenario. So those were some directions that you gave to us before we did our co-design workshops. So I'll take you through that. So we actually led 2 co-design workshops that were held in this room. And of course, I should say that this, the Gawler Civic Centre is a great example of good design, combining heritage and also modern contemporary uses. So we held 2 workshops in April and May. The list of stakeholders there, it was a combination of, we had some of the state government departments, we had your staff, we had a couple of councillors, we had some non-government organisations and some community organisations. So we had a good mix of people. All of the people were quite well informed, including your community group representatives. So we actually had some pretty healthy and well-informed discussions and debates across the 2 workshops, which was pleasing. The first workshop, so the overall aim of the workshops was to collaborate on planning scenarios. But workshop 1, we did some really important work on visioning and principles, that's objective 2, and some really important work on developing different scenarios. And when we do these kind of exercises, you always start broad, you know, you get the long list, if you like. And so we did develop many options in that first workshop, and no idea is a bad idea in the first workshop. And so there's some diagrams on the screen there, which are a little bit hard to interpret just when I flash them up. But for example, we did have a group who were quite focused on this idea of where can we get more local business opportunities and local jobs. And so they wanted to draw and locate, if you like, more employment land, more local activity centres, etc. We had a group 2, were more connected, more interested in connectivity and livability. So how can we connect communities together with walking and cycling paths or open spaces and the like, and their focus was more there. Group 3 focused a little bit more on community infrastructure, everything from hospitals to the future sports park in the south of the city and everything in between. And Group 4 just happened to have more of an emphasis on transport connectivity, including how Gawler can be connected to future growth areas in the north, or the Roseworthy Concordias of the world. And of course, interesting to see some of that rail extension debate reflected in the state budget, with funding put aside for rail investigations. So it'll be interesting to see the results of those investigations over time. So we took that information out of workshop 1 and into workshop 2. So we did some work between the 2 workshops, and you'll see that in a minute. Because we wanted to work up the scenarios so that they could be evaluated and tested. So workshop 1 was about ideas, workshop 2 was much more about evaluation. So particularly that objective number 2, evaluating the 3 options, the 3 scenarios that we'd crunched together between the 2 workshops so that we could work towards a preferred scenario. And I should say work towards a preferred scenario. We're not deciding on anything, we're just working towards the preferred. And we had good collaboration throughout. So I'm going to spend a bit of time on the workshop 2 inputs and outputs. So I mentioned principles. So we actually took 6 principles into workshop 2, which are on the screen there. Now, below these 6, there's lots of detailed sub-principles, but I'm not going to try and describe them because it's very detailed. But I'll just quickly talk about the principles, because they're important, because we test the scenarios against the principles, if you like. So principle 1 is very much about housing, housing choice, housing diversity, housing affordability for future communities. Principle 2, building a brighter future with education, community and services. So not just housing, we want to make sure that we've got the community infrastructure to support that, from schools to childcare to healthcare to aged care, etc. Principle 3, supporting local employment, and most obviously through providing land for business. Principle 4, maintaining identity and values. So that's through design, that's through open space, that's through views, etc. Principle 5 is about a connected city, and as I mentioned, not just transport. Transport is really critical, but it's not just about transport, it's connected open spaces, natural places, connected communities. And number 6, greener Gawler. So that's picking up on the landscape values of a rural context town. It's also talking about having greener suburbs and more canopy cover in our streets, in our suburbs, in our gardens, in our parks. It's about a more sustainable city. So we workshopped these principles in workshop 2. We got some really good feedback on the detail of them, and we were also able to use these to evaluate the scenarios that I'll show you in a second. So you might have a question on the principles later or observations. So we talked about the principles. The other really important thing we did in workshop 2 was we crunched and evaluated 3 scenarios that we pulled together after workshop 1. And the names of those 3 are on the screen there. The first one's called Living and Working Locally. I'll show you that in a second. The second one's called Greener Gawler. The third one's called Connected Gawler. And a couple of important points. When we do scenarios, we deliberately make them a bit different from each other, because it's not much point if they're so similar to each other that you can't quite tell the difference. So we did want to make them deliberately different in their scale. And they're all planning for the long term. So although our project is called Gawler 2046, it might be that they're beyond 2046. We want to think of the long term. What is the right urban footprint, if you like, for this town? It's a good time for us to work that out. So I'll just take you through what the 3 scenarios were. So we, as you can see, we drew them up between workshops 1 and 2 so that there was more detail there for the participants to review. So this is scenario 1, living and working locally. The colour coding, the kind of blue circles are our activity centres. I don't think my laser pointer can go quite far enough, but the big blue circle near the middle, of course, is Gawler Town Centre. The pink areas are generally residential areas. The darker pink are the new areas, okay? So you can see down in the south of the plan, we've got a new southern residential area in kind of dark pink, straddling Main South Road. You can also see, although it's outside the town of Gawler, the big pink Concordia area is shown there as well. You can also see a green corridor separating Playford and Gawler right in the south. You can see some purple areas, which are our employment areas. This scenario shows a new sports park in bright green right in the southeast corner of the town of Gawler, which is maybe a slightly unusual suggestion, but that was land that's potentially available, so we wanted to test this. Anyway, this plan shows a new southern growth area. It shows what we call a 20-minute neighbourhood idea, where people are able to walk to a train station, to local shops, to local schools and community services. We've got more local centres and employment on this one. We wanted to push that local employment opportunity. We've also in this plan got a rail extension to the north, to the sort of Roseworthy area, one of those black lines. And the brown area in the kind of western side is our horticulture area. So most of Hillier, in fact all of Hillier, getting quite close into Evanston South area is horticulture in this plan. This southern growth area has got about 2,500 additional dwellings. That's additional to what's zoned today. So this is actually the smaller of the 3 scenarios we tested, okay? The second one we tested we called Greener Gawler. And we've shown all your existing suburbs in a bit of a greener colour, because we want to emphasise that this plan thinks about, well, how can we work to green our residential streets and our open space corridors and our parks and other land uses more effectively? Of course, you could do that with all the scenarios, but, you know, for the purpose of making them different, we said, well, what would this mean to the overall package? We've also got some of those dark pink residential areas. You can see Concordia, you can see Gawler East, but you can also see a slightly larger southern growth area. But we've taken a bit of time in this design to try and wrap it a little bit with some open space corridors in green. A little bit hard to see because they're a bit small in this plan, but we wanted to separate and transition between new residential areas and the horticulture areas through Hillier. But we've got a slightly larger, about 4,000 or so dwelling residential community in the south, which is quite big. We've also got an idea, which you might have heard about, to build a new or relocated railway station, so that's right in the heart of that southern area, around where Renewal SA have some of their land, and an activity centre, a mixed-use centre, so it's not just a railway station and houses, but there might actually be some shops or businesses or community services in close proximity to this station as well. We've put our sports park much closer to where the housing is on Main North Road, and we've also got some employment areas there as well. The third scenario we tested was called the Connected Gawler. Now this is a much bigger plan. You can see, I hope you can see, there's more pink in this one, particularly down in the southwest. And again, I'm not saying that this is a good, bad or indifferent plan, but this is for testing. We actually showed a much larger residential expansion area to the south. In fact, it might accommodate up to 8,000 dwellings, so more than double the size of some of the smaller scenarios. So you've got a narrower green buffer interurban break between Playford and Gawler in this option. You've got many more people in the south. You've got more activity centres. There's not necessarily additional employment land to go with that, so the balance is maybe a little bit different to some of those earlier ideas. And in this idea, because it's such a big plan, we're actually showing a rail loop that goes from Gawler to Roseworthy and then back east across to Concordia, which is an interesting idea. I don't know whether technically it's viable or not, but we wanted to test these ideas. And testing them we did, so we used a technique which is pretty common called a multi-criteria analysis, which is, as the name suggests, we test against multiple criteria. And you might be able to see along the top column there, the main criteria that we were using were the 6 principles that we had set. So we wanted to test, does this scenario support housing choice? Does it provide community services? Does it support local employment, identity and values, connected city, the greener Gawler notion? So our groups, 3 groups, tested all of these 3 scenarios, and all the individual elements were scored. And I guess the result of the scoring exercise was that the greener Gawler scenario was the scenario that scored the best. It has 97 points on that chart, but the main point is that all 3 groups separately scored it the top scenario. It was the best performing scenario, which is really important, with some notations. So the greener Gawler scenario scored the highest, with some improvements that were identified for us to then take forward and test, which I've listed on the screen there. So all the groups in their evaluations suggested that, well, greener Gawler is good. We really got to focus on living locally and making sure the design works so that communities have a great quality of life and they have access to those community services and open spaces, etc. We felt that the greener Gawler plan needed better connectivity with better alignments of some of the shared paths, public transport, including rail station locations, active transport connections, particularly the Gordon-Tiver road connection, east-west, a new connection across the railway. We need to make sure that that's correct in the planning. We also felt as a group or as a workshop outcome that some of the infill opportunities that are strategic to the town of Gawler, it might be town centre or other key locations, were under-realised in the scenario, so we need to look at that. The group also felt that there needed to be more employment land, and there were a couple of opportunities identified to look at. Green canopy had to be stronger as well, despite the name, the greener Gawler. We need to work on the green corridors better. There was a bit of discussion around bushfire planning and hazard reduction through a planning scale. So we need to work through that in more detail, and we need to test the scenario with our transport modelling, which is underway right now. And James from SMEC, who's not here, is building a model which tests what the implications will be for the road and public transport and active transport network of this scenario. So this is work in progress. This is what we're doing right now. And my last slide is just to, I guess, close out the process. So we are working on a draft growth framework report, which we have not yet prepared and provided to staff even. We're still working through quite a few details of trying to resolve that. And our intention is that that draft report will come back to you, and I think there's a meeting in July. Is that right, Chris? So I think the intention is that report would be tabled with you in July with a recommended draft growth framework plan, recommended to proceed to public consultation. So that's where we are right now. That's the outcome of the co-design workshops and the process we went through. And I hope that informs you of our status, and happy to take any feedback or questions that you have. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael, for the presentation. Councillor Koch, then Mayor Redman.
Thanks, Michael. I've got two questions. The first one, you said that you're still working through the scenarios and you haven't got a preferred option. Is that right? You've got the three there.
No, what we are doing is taking that greener Gawler scenario, which was the highest performing scenario, and we are looking to improve and build upon that with the feedback from the workshop to create one draft plan for the report.
It's just that on page 26 of 53, and I'll just read it out, a core component of the integration of the G2046 studies is the future land use scenario developed through a series of stakeholder engagements. The greening Gawler option received the highest level of stakeholder support and subsequently will be involved in the assessment for the future of land use of Gawler. This option now needs to be converted into a set of land use principles, etc., core assumptions that must be agreed upon to include in Table 2. So are you saying now that this is it, that this is the one that you're going to go ahead with?
What I'm saying is we've taken those workshop outcomes and we're building upon those to create a draft plan that will come back to you for your review.
Okay. Then my second question is, what happens when you go to community consultation if the community doesn't agree and says we're not happy with this level of growth, etc., etc.?
Well, that's up to you as a council. We are involved in a process where we will provide to you a recommended draft plan, and with your support we'll undertake more community and stakeholder consultation, and we will report back to you on the results of that, and ultimately you will decide whether to adopt the plan or to amend the plan. Noting that part of the reason for doing the planning is that the state government in their regional plan work may have their own ideas, and the opportunity is for you here now to, with your community input, to put forward your best plan that you want the state to adopt as much as you wish to adopt it.
Thanks, Michael. Mayor Redman.
Thank you. I like the connected Gawler, I like the greener Gawler. Living and working locally, comprising some 2,500 additional dwellings, creates local jobs through 99 hectares of employment land in the south. Note the term working locally is about providing choice and reducing travel demand for those who prefer not to travel distance to access services, not mandating where people work, which inevitably will be highly variable. Lots of people go on to do tertiary study, and they want higher level jobs. So employment land in the south, that will be base grade jobs, maybe higher level jobs. People who have cars will travel to work, and most people work from home. Some people work 2 days a week, some people work 3 days a week from home, and they go into the office a couple of days a week on the train into the city. So the Northern Expressway is quite full now, because I travel that quite regularly, and a lot of people work outside the town. We need to bring them back. We need to provide jobs locally for people in areas that they want to specialise in. So living and working locally, I think that's an aspirational target, and I think that you know, if you've got a car, you can work anywhere. So I'm not sure about living and working locally. I think that 20 minute distance to work and back home is a really great outcome. However, we can't force people to work wherever they want. They can work wherever they want. We have a lot of FIFO workers in our town, and they work. They go up to Port Hedland, they go up to Roxby Downs, they go everywhere. So that needs to be factored in as well. So I think that living and working locally is a great aspirational target, and I hope that we will get there eventually. But yeah, with people with cars can work anywhere they like. They can work anywhere they like. So I understand, you know, people. I'm a nurse, right? I'm a nurse practitioner, so I work at the Queen Elizabeth. I drive down there a couple of days a week, and it's a great job. It's a fantastic job. So I think that people can work wherever they want. They will come back to work in Gawler if there is a job that they specialise in. So we need to provide those jobs. We need to understand what those jobs are. We need to, if it's education, if it's nursing, if it's medical, if any of those things, we need to understand what those jobs are, and we need to provide them. Thank you.
Members, is there any other questions for Michael? Councillor Davey, Deputy Mayor Davies.
Yeah, so the options that weren't selected, I guess, was there any feedback on sort of, this is a part of this that we really liked, that, you know, even though the thing as a whole didn't make it?
Yes, I think some of those listed outcomes on the second last slide were in that category. So better connectivity, better alignment of key roads, active transport corridors, for example. So yes, I think in the workshop, the groups did say, yes, this is the best scenario of the three, but you need to add these things to it.
Thank you. Question, I'll go to Councillor Solomon and then... Yep, I'll go to Councillor Solomon, then Councillor Koch.
Thank you, Chair. Michael, I was just wondering, there was you mentioned call it the outer northern rail loop potential there in the connected scenario. Was that just in the connected scenario, and is that something which was picked up as being potential to come across into the to be picked up anyway with these investigations which are about to occur by the state government?
Yeah, I think we haven't resolved that question, but I think we'll have to be careful to keep the options open for rail connectivity, given that we aren't able to do the studies ourselves. So we might want to acknowledge the opportunities, but we're not really in a position to know which is the best or most viable connection. So it might be prudent for us to identify the opportunities, but without making any sort of firm recommendation about the technical solution, especially given that there is now a study that will be underway. And the first thing that the new study does is read the previous one, so they'll pick up where we've left off from.
Thank you. Councillor Koch, question?
It's a question to Andrew.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, I just want to get some numbers because we've spoken about Gawler Green potentially having between 7 and 9,400 people, roughly, if you look at 2.4 people per household. Now, and we've got 22,000 people at the moment, so we add that in. I just want to know what the population growth will be when we think about what's zoned for housing now, that we've already got in the system. I think you might be able to help us with that figure. I just want to get a final figure because that's important when we actually think about these scenarios, because we actually have growth anyway.
So my understanding, the population today is 27,000, roughly. 26,700 and change, I think, roughly. So I'd probably go back to what the state government wanted in terms of growth, in terms of target range of medium to high, and they talked about a net increase of land that's not zoned residential. So I'll get you to answer your question sort of indirectly, probably. So they talked about up to sort of 5,000 more dwellings. That's about 13,000, 14,000 more people, roughly. 2.4 times 5,000, roughly, whatever that number equals. And I think at the moment we're looking in the southern area in terms of increase that number's between 3,000 and 4,000, depending on how large the employment zone is on Hales Road. Because at the moment on the version you saw on Greening Gawler, Hales Road is smaller than probably some of the versions we're doing at the moment, where it might be slightly larger and therefore the residential becomes a bit less. So what you gain, you lose. So you gain more employment, you lose some residential, so the numbers may move around a little bit. In terms of the population of Gawler, the numbers I've seen talk about, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but I had a feeling it was 42,000 by 2045, was that the number? Including growth that's occurring? 15,000 more than today, roughly?
I think the population, if we're looking at about 250 dwellings a year, medium growth scenario, over the next 16 years we could get to another 4,000 dwellings, which would essentially really take up all the existing dwelling space, and then we essentially run out of land in about 16 years within Gawler, except for urban infill.
So what's the number exactly?
Well, that 4,000, you've got zone supplies about 10,000 people, and then if this Gawler growth framework says, well, there could be space for another, say, 4,000 dwellings, then that would be another 10,000 people capacity. But I think the timing of that is probably that next stage that we need to work through. We want to first of all fix what do we think is the right, very long-term plan, and then whether it happens quickly or whether it happens slightly more slowly or it happens faster, we have that ability to stage that and manage that over time.
So just to be clear, so in 15 years, we're looking at a population of 47,000. Is that what we're talking about?
No,
Sorry?
no, that's not the case. So basically what we're doing is looking at the supply that's required ultimately up to 20 to 30 years from now. The maximum build, we're saying 2046, but ultimately with the work that we're talking about, it's really to the full build out of Gawler, to its ultimate potential, and that could be 2051, 2055. It could be 20 to 30 years from today. But in terms of the zoned land, I think we're saying 10,000 more people roughly. That brings 27,000 up to 37,000 people. And that would basically be taken up at, you've got the demand of 250 to 300 dwellings a year at the moment, roughly. So you can work out roughly from there what the take-up of that will be. And there's obviously some assumptions on that. And then from there, there's the additional land that council is basically expected to provide as part of the growth corridor. And that brings us up to the ultimate build potential of the area, which is close to 47 to 50,000 ultimately.
I'll go to Councillor Samble.
Thanks, Chairman Ethan. Michael, it's certainly a great lot of work, and it's really good to follow through what you've done up to now. It's been good. I noticed some of those maps there included Concordia. Now, at the present moment, the government can't make up their mind and tell us about these boundaries. Now, I could be dead and gone when they turn around and say the boundaries will be here, 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 here. People at Concordia, at Cutler, are all saying, when are we going to get permission to be able to break our blocks up and we seem to have neglected that area. And some of the other things I noticed that you said was about the train station at Roseworthy. Well, there's so much commenting going on because the latest comment out there in public land is the train going to Lindop. Now, You know, the government's just spent a lot of money on Lindock, or stuck their neck out for a lot of money and that sort of stuff, and that does make a lot of sense, because by 8:30 in the morning, every one of our car parks at the railway stations here are full up with cars that come from the Barossa Valley and the Kapunda area, because they travel down on the train. So it does make a lot of sense with what you said about the train at Roseworthy, because that certainly looks like it's definitely going to happen. And the other thing is that that until such time as the government comes up with the boundaries, the new boundaries and that sort of thing, your program that you're putting to us here tonight may not be the same, because, you know, we don't know where those boundaries are going to go to. Can you understand what I'm saying there? Because what we're seeing, you're telling us, it looks really great, but when the government come to the party and say these are going to be the new boundaries, but Concordia was included in some of your maps there, and we don't have Concordia. I bet your Barossa gets it.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So we have shown Concordia for context. We are not planning for Concordia. In fact, the state government have got a tender call out at the moment for teams to do master planning. So they are looking to develop their own master plan for that. But it is important for us to understand what the potential is there, so that you can plan for what it means for Gawler. That's I guess, what we've said all along. One of the interesting things when thinking about your southern growth potential, or even Gawler East, is, and we talked about this in our workshop, is whether actually some of those areas are actually more developable than Concordia. For example, your southern areas are along an existing electrified railway with capacity. It's got pretty low patronage. It's flat land, some of it, or it's all flat land. Some of it is got limited constraints. And this kind of speaks to the Cudlet affected area, as you called it in your southern rural areas discussion paper. The tricky bit is working out, well, if there's to be more development there, how much should there be, and how do we keep the separation of the towns of Gawler and the Playford area? How do we maintain that separation? So we are planning for that Cudlet affected area. We are trying to work out what is the appropriate future development pattern in there, because it does need to have that function as a buffer between Gawler and Playford as well. So our plans do not show it as being a just suburban growth area. So we are working through that in this current piece of work. And the rail extensions, so you're right, we talked about rail extensions to the north. We also talked very briefly about the potential for a new or alternative station location in the south that provides for the housing very close to where the housing is. And it is good that the state government are funding more investigations there. And just a final comment in talking about the numbers, it is difficult to verbalise growth projections over many decades. So we will document this in our report so that it's as clear as we can make it what the future demand and supply is, so that you can read it and have a good understanding of that before you make any decision on moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Question, Councillor Shanks?
Yeah, just to hopefully simplify. So for me, I take in every time that you show the maps through that regional lens, which is something we do need to look at, because obviously, the population growth doesn't just happen to isolated to Gawler, no matter where our local council boundaries are, but there are opportunities that potentially could arise that we do need to look at it through the bigger picture regional lens to see what the needs are. And that's why, public transport, I think, was a strong one that came out of workshops, not only with this chamber, but with the members that chose to attend your other workshops as well. Whether that be regional infrastructure like link roads from Concordia out to the highway, what effects that has down Lindock Road, the southern precinct, what that actually looks like in not only what that supports our population within our boundaries, but also vice versa, because each one of these sporting precincts has another team from another council area that will ultimately use it, and vice versa. So correct me if I'm wrong, but every time I see you put up those maps and you talk about the potential development, you mentioned Roseworthy, you mentioned Concordia, we talk briefly about the relationship with Playford, but that is merely in the context of regional growth. No matter what happens with the boundary, we need to be thinking about these things.
That's correct. We have to get it right locally, but we also have to get it right regionally for the reasons that you described.
Thank you. I might just go to Andrew for a comment briefly.
Through the chair, Councillor Samble raised a good point about Concordia. I guess what we should say, and I'm happy to ask this as a question or a statement, I'm not sure which, bit of both. Ultimately, I think the brief on 2046 and integrated transport plan is a bit agnostic as to the future of Concordia. We don't control what the minister decides to do. But ultimately, we also need to be aware that the decision on Concordia will affect the transport network, the demand on services in Gawler, and therefore Jensen's leading the community engagement. But the integrated transport plan, for example, will be looking at things like how the connections from Concordia affect the road network in Gawler, and I guess more broadly at community infrastructure as well. So it's important that regardless of boundaries, we're aware of what the government agenda is and we can plan for that as best we can. So I guess you can answer that from your point of view too, Michael, but it's just, I thought I should add that.
No, I'd agree entirely. It's we've got to think contextually so that for the impacts on yourselves, but also the opportunities for Gawler as well.
Thank you. Members, have we got any other questions for Michael? No? No, all good. Michael, thank you very much for presenting, answering questions, coming out. Patrick, same to you. And yeah, appreciate the update on what you're doing. Oh, Councillor Shanks, yes. Sorry, just popped in my head there. Sorry, Michael. Just one more. We have on page 26 of 53 of our report, it talks about employment zones, ratios and the like. When we look at these sorts of graphs, it is easy to go, oh, Gawler's falling behind. But also you need to look at it contextually too, because obviously if we could be compared to, say, Barossa at 900 and something square kilometres, wine industry, different zoning and the like, comparing us to 42 square kilometres of, yes, denser population, but no wine opportunity and the like, then we also be put next to Port Adelaide Enfield, which, if we talk about square kilometres, without swearing, it does the proverbial all over our square kilometres. So I guess, how do we get that ratio? How do we actually look on it? I mean, I'm always for more employment zones, but not just for the sake of it. Sustainable, obviously. So I guess just some context around how we get to the balancing point that we're sitting at. A ratio of 0.67 when Barossa is 0.75. If we look at it like that, how do we break down the factors here? Tricky question, I know, but there is a balancing act there. We are a small council by land, bigger by population, but you know what I mean.
I think so far we've suggested as a principle we should aim to maintain your jobs ratio as a target. So we keep providing opportunity. We heard the Mayor comment on the flexibility of the workforce and the flexibility of the economy, and yes, people do work all over the place, but they do change jobs, so we do want to provide opportunities for local business and local employment. There's also, it wasn't mentioned, but your rating balance as well. I would imagine that you want to maintain commercial rate revenue. You don't just want to be a residential only community, and so there's that factor. So it's very difficult to break down scientifically what the optimum ratio should be, but we've taken the view, well, we don't want to go backwards. We want to provide as many, if not more, opportunities for local employment as exist today, so that you can become a really integrated community that has job opportunities and business opportunities, and that are plentiful and that are there as options for your young people in the future. That's really the principle we've taken so far.
Brilliant, thanks, Michael. Is there any other questions for now? No, thank you very much for the presentation and questions. Members, we've got an officer's recommendation. I'll look for a mover. Mayor Redmond, would you like to speak?
Yes. Thank you for Michael McCowan from Jensen Plus, your very comprehensive presentation. I'm happy to move this motion. Recommends to Council that the progress report on Gawler Growth Framework 246 and the Gawler Integrated Transport Strategy. You didn't talk about the Integrated Transport Strategy much, but I'm looking forward to our workshop coming up in the 17th of July, I think it is. Otherwise referred to as the Gawler Growth Framework, be noted. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor. Seconder, Councillor Hennessy.
Yeah, I'm happy to second it. I also thank the officers for the report. I think getting regularly updated with the amount of detail that we are is useful. For myself, there was a couple of questions that I was able to direct to staff about the sporting precinct, but just being kept up to date with the detail is helping us to inform the community and answer questions that are already popping up, sometimes ahead of time, but it's good that we're starting to, the community is engaging. They may be a little down into the micro detail at this stage, but hey, that's not a bad thing. At least we've got engagement, so happy to second the motion.
Thanks, Councillor Hennessy. Discussion, members? Councillor Shanks?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Look, I did notice this was in our decision reports. However, it's only a noting report. Just a small technicality there to pass on the feedback. Yeah, look, I think I, like Councillor Hennessy, am liking the updates. Respectfully, I might disagree with the Mayor just ever so slightly, because I think the bigger picture conversation we did talk about was about transport and about potential options or potential models we do need to visit in relation to that regional big picture thinking, which, I think where I'm seeing and where I'm a little bit more optimistic these days in seeing these plans flow through is again that underpinning theme of how do we activate our space? How do we best activate our space? Which I think is gearing us up to be able to be in a position to be ready for development rather than that development happen to us. And I think we all have that development that happens to us example that pops into your head. And I'm sure we've all got different ones when we think about it based on our own experiences, our own opinions. But if we're not thinking about these things and we're, in lack of a better term, burying our heads in the sand, we get left behind. I'm happy to see the workshops pick up on some of the themes that, one, consolidated the terms, because before I was looking at, a lot of those different, those pillars as, if we talk about employment lands, you are ticking a lot of those boxes, whether it be local livability and all those things. So I'm glad to see that consolidation. The greener position, when we talked it through and the feedback that was then picked up, that was probably the things that I was going to flag as well, because out of all three of those options, for me, it was a mix between all three of them, and realistically, that's what got picked up. I'm really optimistic and looking forward to seeing what visions sort of come out of all this, because employment zones, as we go around the table, I'm sure we'd all give different opinions, but that opportunity as a regional hub, which we do preach out there that we are, which I believe we are, we have a diverse offering of employment, whether that be from your checkout people at supermarkets up to your high-level professionals. But that said, we are proving throughout our budget processes and the data we gather that the more residential ratepayers we have without taking on the equal commercial ratepayers, we are sort of finding that the serviceability of the residential of our current population is very difficult to do without that additional commercial ratepayer base and income. So the balance, I think, when we're looking at a big picture is not to keep more of the same. I think we do need to aim for that employment zone ratio to actually be a little bit higher. That said, I think it is impossible, as I flagged before, to compare us with your Barosses, because different industries, different council areas, different zoning. That's not to say we can't benefit from our neighbours and vice versa. So yeah, look, I think that commercial versus residential rate is something we do need to look at as a holistic thing. But I'm really liking the underlying themes of, again, that what can be done. To me, that sporting precinct in the back corner, I wasn't for personally. I like the idea of sporting precincts that have thousands of people at them each weekend closer to town centres. I also love the idea of being able to utilise a state government road as well to be off in that back end. But again, that's probably more micro level. I'm liking the macro thinking that's going on, so to provide that feedback. So yeah, that's probably all for me, and I, like Councillor Hennessy and the Mayor, really appreciate these updates, because this is a big parcel of work, and yeah, it is good to be informed along the way, because there's it's very easy to make assumptions if we're not. So I do thank you for that.
Thanks, Councillor Shanks. Is there any other discussion, members? Councillor Koch?
Thanks, Chair. I've got a different view of the world. I'm not concerned about being left behind. I'm concerned about being overrun. That's my concern. I've spoken to many people in the community, and they're quite anxious and nervous about what they're reading, what they're hearing. They're very concerned about maintaining the separation from Greater Adelaide. All they're seeing is a big block of urban sprawl in the rural zone. That's all they're seeing. You can look at a couple of strips of green here and there, but really that's what the community is saying to me. They're very, very concerned about it. I would be concerned, because once it gets adopted, that's it. There won't be, in certain areas, there won't be production, there won't be lifestyle. So the people that own that land in that area, basically all they can do is take whatever a developer gives them, and that's usually less than really what it's worth. So I think people that are advocating for subdivision should really do a bit of a business plan about whether it's beneficial for them to look at a different scenario than waiting around for basically 20 years, because that's what it said in here, 2 decades away, to sell to a developer. That's my concern. So again, I think it's just a scenario of urban sprawl, and we've had that continually in Gawler, where people have been concerned about urban sprawl. It doesn't go away. I'm a bit unsure about the comments about that we're obliged to have this growth because state government has upgraded the rail system. The rail system's been there for over 100 years. It was steam, it was diesel electric, it's now electric. I think every other capital city has been electric decades ago. So it is just evolution. So I don't remember being told there was an obligation on this community to have a big block of houses in Cuddler as a result of the government providing electrified trains. I don't remember that ever. So that's just jumped out of I don't know where. The next concern I have is community infrastructure. We're just looking at another 10,000 people or so just in an ordinary zoned area. And when I read the sporting analysis, in there it actually says, well, we're just going to upgrade 3 sporting grounds, and that's going to provide enough capacity for those people. That's another 10,000 people. Those sporting clubs have come here and told us they're already at capacity. How can we add another 10,000 plus? Because, I mean, there's only one A-grade footy team, B-grade, C-grade, you can't add more things, so people will miss out. So I'm just concerned that we haven't looked at the community infrastructure. And then if we add, the other, 7,000 to 9,000 down at Cuddler, there doesn't seem to be any scenario at all about providing community infrastructure. And then I'm just really concerned about the tight time frames. I don't think it gives enough time for people to actually digest what's been proposed. I think it's in August we're going to have the, August, September, I think. And this is a huge, huge, huge thing that will happen to Gawler. It will actually, if this gets adopted, it completely changes Gawler as we know it. And when we look at the community plan, people value Gawler as a township. If this happens, Gawler would just be part of Greater Adelaide, and it won't be a township. It will just be consumed, enveloped into Greater Adelaide, and that'll be the end of it. So all those other things that we think are great will be lost. And I just want to talk quickly on the Gawler Green scenario. I had a really good look at that, and it talked about more trees and working with the gullies and stuff. We actually have a tree management plan, and we're going to get all the trees that we need. There is enough trees in Gawler, and those gullies, I mean, I've worked in those gullies. They're not recreational areas. You might want to put a fire access on it, but they're steep. People won't use. You cannot use them. They're a biodiversity asset. So sometimes I use the term a three-card trick, and it sort of sounds like to me we're giving you something to get, so you get this over here, but in reality we've already got that over here, and we're giving away something over here. So for me, I don't like the scenario at all. So unfortunately, I'll have to vote against this because I really want my community to know where I stand because I've listened to them. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Solomon.
Thank you, Chair. I'm glad to see this this report and the work that's been put into this. I'm really excited to see that draft which comes through and will go out to the community. Also, of course, I should mention that we've spoken a lot about the growth framework, but we also had some additional elements which are included in the report, such as the water study, which I think is a great step forward because it shows that we're doing data-driven strategic planning now. We've talked about the southern rural areas for a long time. We've talked about that area in Hillier in particular and the viability or feasibility of actually having horticulture there. And this is really showing that we're actually taking steps to see what is viable and where it's viable as well. I think that it's good to do this planning because I might disagree with some other members of the chamber, but growth is happening, and to just say that we oppose growth without having any alternative vision for what we would like, I think is not the way to go. I think that I look forward to that debate which comes to the chamber, and I look forward to talking about the draft that comes out, because if there's an alternative vision out there, I would love for someone to put it to this chamber, because I would prefer to hear that alternative vision rather than saying, no, not that, not that, not that, which I think we've done with the SRA for a long, long time, is tell the community and tell everyone, the state government, any other interested party, what it shouldn't be, and not actually define what it is. I think that we're taking some great steps in that direction of actually defining what we want, what a vision is for our town, and by doing that, I think that we are advocating for our town. I think when we just say what we don't want, that's not standing up, that's sitting back. And I think that if there's an alternative vision, it should be put to the chamber. However, I agree with most of this in here. I like what we've talked about in terms of local employment as well. It's important to acknowledge the growth in the education, health, early childhood education sectors that are occurring here in Gawler at the moment. They're skilled sectors as well, which the Mayor mentioned earlier, people who have a tertiary education having the ability to work. How do we accommodate that growth? How do we accommodate how do we accommodate, we've talked about dining and food before. What does that look like? Starting to get a picture of what that employment looks like in our town and what we can actually offer. And of course, transport is a very important element to this as well, in terms of providing appropriate infrastructure. We're doing the best possible job we can to position ourselves well to have those conversations with state government and with other parties. Of course, the GARP's going on at the moment. If we weren't doing this work, I would fear for our town and what might come out of that, lest we didn't have a vision. To to make up part of that state government planning. They've also announced, of course, the transport studies which are going to occur. Once again, if we weren't doing that work, I would fear what would come out of that, because I think that we would be, we would have development which is not good for our town and is not in keeping with the kind of values and identity that we want. But I think, as I've said from the get-go, we need to talk not about what kind of identity we don't want, not about, oh, we're not part of the suburbs and blah, 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 but actually say, this is what we are, this is our vision, and this is what we want to be as part of our region, as part of our state. So I'll be supporting the motion. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Solomon. Is there any other discussion, members? Just a couple of things from me. I first of all just really value the updates, and to actually get the consultants to come in here and speak to us is really good. Understand that we didn't have the consultant in regards to the transport strategy, but through the report that is progressing really well, and obviously these two key strategies are intertwined very, very much so. I think the discussion around the table tonight, we all seem to be on the same wavelength, in the sense that we need to look at, this is a huge task that we've set, that I would say we're required to do. And as Councillor Solomon said, if we don't embrace the growth, there's no way to stop it, unfortunately. This is the nature of where we sit at the moment. And if there are other options, I would love to see them as well. But I do think that the work that Jensen has done to date, and actually engaging with our community, finding out exactly what our community members want to see prior to starting their work, I think is a really great approach. And it's being reflected in the plan, which is now we've seen unfold over the past 12 months or so. I think it's really fantastic. So thanks to all involved for getting us this far, and look forward to seeing it progress and then continue to engage with our community. Mayor Redmond, did you want to close the debate?
Yes, thank you. I hear Councillor Shanks's comments, I hear Councillor Solomon's comments, and I also hear Councillor Kosh's comments. We are a peri-urban community. Right across Australia, every peri-urban community has growth issues. And so Gawler Growth Framework update is a really good piece of work. Thank you to Chris Hannaford and Richard Frimbong, Michael McGowan from Jensen Plus, who gave us a brief presentation. And I'd just like to thank everybody involved with the Gawler Growth Framework, the Integrated Transport Strategy 246. I think this is a really good piece of work. It will set us up for success. It is a really good piece of work, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please raise your hand. All those against? It's carried. Thank you. Members, how do we feel about a 10-minute break, or would you like to power through? Ten-minute break? Cup of tea time? Okay, we'll have a 10-minute break, and we'll come back just before 9 o'clock. Thank you. Okay. Okay, we'll resume everyone with information reports. Item 8.1, response of SA Government to Expert Panel Report March 2024. I'm looking for a mover. We've got an officer's recommendation. Councillor Hennessy.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm happy to move this. A really interesting report and great to see the response both of the government to the expert panel's comments and then staff pointing out how it directly affects us as a council. For me, I am really pleased to see how the expressing of local character such as historic elements and climate change will be addressed. I look forward to the relocation of local and state heritage places from the PDI Act across to the Heritage Place Act. And also some of the other factors, including that replacement buildings need to be approved prior to demolition. All of these things, I think, are going to affect planning in Gawler in the next few years. So for people who haven't read through the details, it's well worth it, particularly attachment 2, which was the one that brought it back. No, attachment 2? Attachment 4, I think, which is, attachment 4, which is the impact they have on town of Gawler. So, I'm happy to move the officer's recommendation.
Thanks. Moved by Councillor Hennessy. A seconder? Deputy Mayor Davies, would you like to speak? No. Is there any discussion, members? Councillor Shanks?
I read this report with great interest. Being a councillor, there is that council lens that ultimately we all look through. But as someone that uses the planning portal quite regularly as well, also picking up on some of the successes and also things that aren't quite working on a staff level, it was actually quite humbling to see that you're not the only one that sometimes gets a little bit frustrated with the portal. There are a couple of bugs or goalposts that move throughout when you want to try to operate through the portal. Access becomes a little bit of a problem, and these systems, should we want them to improve, feedback is a very, very important part of that. There can be a whole bunch of thinking that goes into the design on something, but until it's used, it does, identify some of the areas of improvement by use only. The other themes that I liked in the report was, yes, absolutely, around our heritage protection. To be honest, I think our old system in heritage protection probably could have used a little bit of updating, as my personal opinion, because it talked about, again, that what you couldn't do without the replacement of what you could do in a logical sense. And because of that, I think there was a lot of inaction in regards to some heritage places that we're seeing at a level of dilapidation today that may have been a little bit different. So what I do like in this feedback is, albeit, yes, hey, we are lacking a bit more protection as what we need, which I don't disagree, but what does that protection look like and how do we assist the opportunities that are available for heritage building owners? So I'm liking that feedback go through. Naturally, I can't unsee planners requesting more time with the deemed consent. I just can't. I'm sorry. But I know that's not isolated to the town of Gawler. That's everyone wants more time to do their work, do their due diligence. I guess the only thing that I look at and sometimes become a little bit sceptical on is the people that use it right. Absolutely, let's do our due diligence. Sometimes we do get reports that have it that a RFI might be sent out when that time clock is about to close, and some of that request for information sometimes becomes pretty clear. It was just asked to extend that clock a little bit further. And that's not isolated to Town of Gawler. I'm not talking about Town of Gawler as a whole. I'm just saying in general feedback terms. And if we do see that time extended, non-genuine RFIs, I'll quite easily categorise it, being used and then it extends out 30 days instead of the 10. It's one of those ones where you go, it is eye-twitching at that level when you're trying to advance through. But again, that's only a high-level experience that I share from both hats that I wear. But overall, I really did like the report, Chris, and thank you for sending it through. And I do like the time that was spent in real workings throughout to provide that feedback. That's what I could read through all our submissions on this is how it's working for us and this is what we're learning through our network, not only in the Town of Gawler but throughout other councils and other groups we work through. So I think Town of Gawler have really done well in their advocacy role in this space.
Thank you, Councillor Shanks. Is there any further discussion on this item? No. Councillor Hennessy, are you happy for me to put that motion? Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. We'll move to 8.2. Mayor Redmond, you've got a conflict.
I have a general conflict. This is an update on noting the Town of Gawler participation in the Climate Emergency Australia 224 conference. I've classed it as a general conflict. I do not have a predetermined view. I have a fair and open mind, and I'll stay in the room and vote in the best interest of the community, and I won't engage in the debate.
Okay, thanks, Mayor. Tim Kelly, the author of the report, is here. I might ask Tim to come up to the lectern. Thanks, Tim. So, Tim, you with the Mayor attended the conference. Thank you for the report. Did you want to provide us a bit of a verbal show and tell of the conference, or any other questions members might have to answer? Maybe we can start with maybe a bit of a rundown if you're comfortable with that, Tim. Would that be okay? Sorry for putting you on the spot.
Certainly, yeah. But I'm afraid I can't really do it justice. What I'd really suggest is that there are some hyperlinks in the council paper, and I'd really suggest that councillors have a look at particularly the opening plenary sessions and get a feel for what the conference covered. In a nutshell, we had a presentation, and they were very well presented and considered thoughts on the state of climate. And the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change Scientists undertook a survey, and overwhelmingly they are very, very concerned about the acceleration of climate change that we're witnessing. And that should be of real concern, because we're now well and truly past the 1.5 degree scenario on our current behaviour, on global behaviour generally, heading towards above 2 to 3 degrees Celsius climate change, and if we continue on that path as a species, then that's not really compatible with civilization. So that was really quite challenging to see in the opening sessions. We had another really important talk which revealed that we are facing a climate emergency, but are we treating it as an emergency? Have we treated it in the same way that we treated COVID, or that we respond to bushfire emergencies? Or is it's so slow that we've become a bit numb? So the presenter did a survey and asked how many councils have the climate change links right from the front page of their websites, and only one council put up their hand and said, we do. They were all climate emergency councils attending, and most of them had good materials on climate change, but we just aren't really cutting through with the messaging that we should really be presenting. Well, that was the viewpoint presented anyway. But then I think it finished well at the end of the plenary session, saying nobody can afford to just get caught up on the doom and gloom side of things. And one of the presenters, Councillor McCarthy, referred to a quote by Christina Figueres, who's an architect of the Paris Agreement, who said, what we really need now is radical collaboration and relentless optimism. And I think that's a role that the town of Gawler can play in its approach in dealing with the issues around accredited renewable electricity and carbon offsets, and getting clear and consistent rules so that councils can play their part in responding to the climate emergency, and that our communities can too. And that those efforts aren't double counted, they're not used for free riding and all of the other issues that we're facing. So that was really uplifting for me, and it put me in a better frame of mind for the rest of the day. I spoke in my session on our advocacy around the renewable energy and carbon offsets, and I went through some details around basically how we can't have a cake and eat it as well as claiming it at the same time. I even had a picture of a cake in my presentation, and my presentation is online if you would like to see it. I've re-recorded the actual presentation of my presentation as well, because the recordings didn't work on the day. But in that, we went through some of our work on the advocacy that we've done, engaging with other councils, engaging at the Australian Local Government Association, engaging at the Local Government Association, but also we put in submissions on the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. That's the international mob that prepare the greenhouse guidance for businesses right across the world. We've had some direct input there. We've put in our submission on the State Government Climate Change Act, which is being reviewed now. We've put in our submission on Climate Active, and we've put in our submission most recently on the National Greenhouse and Energy Reporting Framework. Now, all of those consultation processes are playing out behind back doors now, so we can't see what the discussions are, but we've certainly had our input, and there's a growing awareness that things need to change, because there's a lot of distrust in greenwashing and all of those issues that stem from not having a good accounting frameworks and clear rules. Basically, we also need things like renewable energy. If they're cheaper to produce, they should be cheaper to buy. At the moment, for councils, it's a huge premium above the cost of electricity, and that's not right. I'll just finish on the communication. This is the most challenging one for me, because I'm not really a natural communicator, but we need to be engaging with our media staff, people who can communicate, on improving our websites, improving how we engage with the community, including how we engage with government and all stakeholders. And it gets back to that radical collaboration and relentless optimism. We need to be speaking with people who can help us do it better. So certainly we've made some improvements to our website, so you now can access our Climate Emergency Action page from the front page. And overall, I found that it was a really good conference. The topics were wide-ranging. If you wanted to look at some of the examples on climate adaptation, they were on the second day, which was an online event. You can click on those as well and have a look at what was said there. City of Adelaide made a presentation there, or Maria Zotti did. I'm not sure if she did it under the City of Adelaide banner or the Campbelltown banner, but she's recently changed. But it was a really good event. I'd urge you to have a look at some of those presentations online. It would be time well spent. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim, for the update. I much appreciated. Members, do you have any questions for Tim? Councillor Koch, then Councillor Shanks.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Through you, Chair. Tim, can you just give us some examples of junk offsets and bad accounting and greenwashing? Because maybe if we get some examples, you might be able to identify them when we see them.
I can't directly sort of criticise anything and end up with defamation, but I guess the type of thing that you'd be looking at is if there are methods which say that they would deliver a certain amount of carbon capture and they don't, and that can be proven that they don't, then obviously offsets created from that are going to be called junk offsets. And what has happened with review work that's been undertaken is a number of methods have been withdrawn. The federal government is still trying to actively pursue new methods for carbon offsetting, so there's a lot of pressure to get new offsets out there. But these offsets need to have integrity and credibility need to be demonstrated. And then there's also things like the duration of the offset. So some of the offsets can have deemed permanence for as little as 25 years. Is that really enough? Is a carbon offset permanent if it's only for 25 years? Or should it be more like 100 years? They're questions which keep coming around and need to be addressed. The other part of carbon offsets is who claims the abatement. At the moment, because we don't have an adequate legal foundation, the projects that create the abatement on the land, say, can claim that abatement on site, as well as put it into Australian carbon credit units and sell those to a third party, and that third party claims that abatement as well. So until we have debit and credit rules that stop that type of loophole double counting, then there's going to continue to be concerns on both the integrity of offsets and the accounting of offsets. Renewable energy has very similar problems in that you can create renewable energy on site, large-scale renewable energy, claim it on site and sell large-scale certificates at the same time to third parties, and that creates double counting. It also lacks the legal integrity that it needs. So there's a whole range of those issues which the town of Gawler has put to the agencies working on policy and the accounting and the assurance frameworks. And it's also being addressed internationally. So it's not just an Australian problem, it's an international problem, because these systems have grown up with everybody trying to work around and do something, but never with a view to getting the rules right before we go further into really big markets worth billions and billions of dollars.
Thanks, Tim. Councillor Shanks, then Councillor Hennessy.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. I was actually just going to ask, are you able to send us a couple of links to elected members on the presentations that you talked about? Oh, they're
they're in the report, yes. Councillor Shanks.
They are. Those are the ones in the report.
Through the chair.
Sorry, I thought I walked in a little bit into your presentation and I thought there was some more, sorry.
Through the chair, there's 3 links in there, but also if you go into those links and look around a little bit more, you'll find a lot more. So.
I appreciate that, thank you, sorry.
No worries. Councillor Hennessy.
Yeah, thanks very much for the presentation. It's always good to get feedback from the conferences, so very useful. And congratulations of getting the climate change up on the splash page of the council website. Useful to have it there. In reviewing it again, it's mainly talking about what council as an organisation is doing. Chris, and I was just wondering whether, taking into mind this communication of the threat with action to take idea, which resonates with me, whether we could also add some links that members of the community who might want to know what action they could take could follow. I don't even think it would be things that we'd have to put together. I think there's probably some third-party organisations that have that, so that, you know, this is what council as an organisation is doing, and here you as a resident, if you're interested, could start down this path. Just a thought about increasing the communication.
That's a good suggestion. Tim, did you want to respond to that?
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, Councillor Hennessy, thank you very much for that suggestion. It's something we're aware that we need to improve on ourselves. We're challenged sometimes in the mitigation space what we can say, but certainly in the community resilience space, there's a whole lot more that we can be doing. We need to be connecting people with the information that they need to keep cooler in summer, warmer in winter, to prepare for the bushfire season, and a whole range of other things like that and initiatives that we could do at very low cost. So we're certainly looking at what we can do on our website and what else we could do as well. And when I do my next update on the Climate Emergency Action Plan, I hope to bring back some ideas on that.
Thank you, Tim. Is there any other questions for Tim, members? No. Thank you, Tim, for being here and presenting. Much appreciated. Members, there's an officer's recommendation. I'll ask for a mover. Councillor Hennessy, would you like to speak? No. Seconder? Councillor Koch got in first. Would you like to speak? No. Is there any discussion on the motion? If there's none, Councillor Hennessy, I'll put that motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you, everyone. There's no items listed for discussion. No items listed for discussion at future meetings. Are there any questions without notice, members? Are there any motions without notice? No, and then I'll close the meeting at 9:18 p.m. and the next meeting is on the 13th of August. Thank you very much, everyone.